When I was in school here 10 years ago, I spent a lot of time in Doc's very first classroom up in what I think is now primary school. And in it, there was this big sign on the wall in word art letters that said, "Don't act." It was super weird. She's a drama teacher. It's as weird for a drama teacher to tell you not to act as it is for a civil rights lawyer to tell you not to help. But that is exactly what I'm going to tell you today. Don't help. How many of you guys are required to do volunteer hours before you graduate? Good. Awesome. That's good. That's fantastic. How many of your parents give money to causes they believe in? Also good. Thank you. Listen, I work at a nonprofit. If you stop volunteering and your parents stop giving, I don't have a job anymore, so please keep doing those things. I just need you to know what you're doing when you're doing them. You're doing charity. Putting $1 in a basket or doing a beach cleanup or serving in a soup kitchen can make you feel really good, and it should. It absolutely should. But it can also make you feel like your work is done, and it's not. If you're sitting in this room today with us, you have privilege. And what I mean by that is that you have certain advantages that some people don't. Some of them you were born with, some of them were given to you, some of them you earned. Just by virtue of graduating from this top-tier school, you're going to have the privilege of an education better than most people who have ever lived. And that privilege comes with responsibility. What everyone around you right now is trying to train you to do is to use that responsibility, is make you volunteer, make you give stuff to people. But it's actually something you don't need to be trained to do at all. It's something you're built for. It's empathy. Human beings have these really cool things called mirror neurons. So when you watch me feeling an emotion, those mirror neurons fire in your brain the same way that the primary neurons are firing in mine. We're actually built to be compassionate. But feeling other people's emotions can be really hard work, especially in a world with as much pain as ours has in it. It's way easier to turn that empathy off by focusing on money or status or celebrity fashion, I'm told. I run a national campaign to end something called conversion therapy, which tries to turn lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender kids straight. I work with survivors of some of the worst physical and psychological trauma you can imagine. And there are only so many of those stories you can hear with an open heart before it starts to feel like one more second of empathy is going to break it. Feeling is hard. If it were easy, this world wouldn't be full of so much pain. But if you can hold on to it, you can develop a moral compass that no number of volunteer hours is ever going to give you. And that kind of purpose isn't about charity. It's about justice. Last year, I got to take a survivor of some of these practices to Switzerland to testify with me at the United Nations. We got to chase these world-renowned diplomats all around these big, famous circular hallways, and we got to make seasoned torture experts cry. And against all odds, we got to convince the Committee Against Torture to address conversion therapy as an issue of human rights law for the first time in United Nations history. We celebrated pretty hard. We thought we were done. We were so wrong. On the last day of those meetings, representatives from the government under review have a chance to respond to the questions the committee has asked them. Now, there was a group of young activists there with us that week from Chicago, and they had also convinced the committee to pressure the United States to address their issue, which was racially disproportionate police violence. Just before the session began, one of them ran all the way around that big famous circular room and kneeled right next to us and whispered in my ear that when the United States began denying their allegations, they were going to stand in silent protest holding pictures of their slain loved ones. And I thought, badass. Then they asked if we would join. Now, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. If you go more than a few blocks there without encountering a protest, you have to seriously consider the possibility of a zombie apocalypse. I've been in actions everywhere from the Brooklyn Bridge to the halls of Congress, but this was the United Nations. This does not happen there. Just being there was maybe the biggest moment of my life, and I was scared. I was scared to break the social contract. I was scared what people would think. I was scared that it would hurt our advocacy on our issue. But I'd also spent a week breaking bread with these incredible activists telling me through tears what it's like to lose the most important person in your life for no reason other than the color of their skin and have nobody care. I couldn't get rid of this nagging feeling that if it was my best friend or my sister or my son who had been left to bleed in the street, standing would be the most tame reaction I could manage. So when the time came, we stood. We stood for 30 minutes with cameras pointed right at us, unable to turn around, totally unaware if we were alone in this. And by the time it was over, and we found out that we weren't alone, and that in fact the protest had had a monumental impact on the committee's final report, we were too exhausted to celebrate. But we felt good. We became allies that day, and some of the Chicago activists we stood with have actually gone on to make it quite possible that Illinois is going to be the next state to pass a law protecting youth from conversion therapy. But when it comes down to it, we didn't stand up for each other because it was the strategic thing or the smart thing or even the right thing. Honestly, at the time, I didn't know if it was. That's exactly the moment you need a moral compass grounded in empathy to point you to true north. There's this great quote from these amazing Aboriginal activists that goes like this: "If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." If you try to help, it's going to be as obvious as if you try to act, and believe me, bad helpers are about as painful to watch as bad actors. What Doc taught me 10 years ago, and what I want to pass on to you today, is that the key to success, no matter your calling, is not to do, but to feel with radical authenticity. And I promise you, success will take care of itself. Last week, I got to talk about this stuff with the New York Times, 4 members of Congress, and the White House. But that success will also ask a lot from you. It'll ask you to risk your own privilege because you have more to risk. It'll ask you to develop a moral compass strong enough to point north in a storm, and it will ask you to keep sailing into that storm over and over, even when you know how bad the wind is going to burn. It will also be worth it. Sympathy without empathy is dehumanizing. Charity without justice is temporary, and success without purpose is empty. But this world needs empathy, and it needs justice, and it needs purpose. It needs you to live the life that you were built to live. It doesn't need your help, it needs your heart. And that is all the wisdom I have to impart, and it's not even mine, it's Doc's. So thank you so much for having me.